Then we're gonna throw down a little bit.
I would rather you guys just jump in on the throwdown and let's hear it.
All right.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is Thursday, August 13th, but it's feeling like Friday the 13th because of our IT issues. But I am Eric Planey,
Hi, I'm Lucas Finko.
and today we have as our third pirate. Ladies and gentlemen, take it away, Ishi.
Hi, everybody. My name is HG Chissel. Happy to be here and get on the ship here. Looking forward to it. I'm sure we're going to have a good time. So, hello.
Fantastic. And so the three of us are the Pirates of Clean Tech.
Arr, arr. That's why I wanted to join the show, actually. Let's get my arr.
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's fantastic. We have a great marketing incentive, the ARG. Some people don't even want to do it.
Oh, man.
I know. It's just sad. Well, anyways, I'm going to turn it over to Lucas so he can introduce his longstanding friend, and we'll start taking it from there.
Hey, yeah. So HJ, it's great to have you on the show. It's really cool that we can have you. I know you've been involved in the clean tech scene in New York and the Northeast for a long time. So I'd love to hear about, what you're up to, what's Advanced Energy Group, and, what made you start that, and, what's behind that.
Thank you. I think it's been a journey. When you start moving around every week and going someplace, you realize how much time is moving. Almost like walking around real busy on a cruise ship, you don't realize that you're actually going someplace at the same time. So it's been over 10 years or more that I got involved with working on demand response. And demand response, I was really lucky to link up with a woman who was the chief operating officer of PJM, who went into starting her own company, Veridity Energy, which had a vision of advanced demand response, really just going right to the edge of concepts like virtual power plants, demand supply optimization, really turning the whole power paradigm upside down and really seeing how the end user is critical to the equation and finding ways to develop platforms and infrastructure to make that happen, and software, et cetera. And part of that journey and being a part of that group was being able to work on the Smart Grid Demonstration Grant, the Department of Energy Smart Grid Demonstration Grant with Con Edison. And that's what got me from Philadelphia area into New York City, working on that project. It got me connected to Con Edison, which has been an incredible journey, meeting very inspiring leaders across the organization. I do believe Con Edison is truly one of the leading utilities out there on trying to make this work, regardless, I don't know how to say this, regardless of not being overly attached to their particular way of being. I think a lot of utilities, this conversation of massive transformation is one that is had, but to have it really influence all of the elements of the organization is very difficult. And I think reforming the energy vision, was critical in enabling a breakthrough for utilities to consider a different business model where end users were involved in load demand management, as well as the utility putting infrastructure in the ground. So that was a little bit of my past. I think in working in demand response, I learned quickly how difficult it is to develop and deliver breakthrough advanced energy projects that move us in the right direction. There's just so many silos that you need to bust through to get an on-site battery storage project approved, working, and providing value. You can ask many people that have scars from that in New York City trying to make that happen. Think about my good friend Doug Staker, who had a great company that went on to be acquired by NLX. That was a pioneer in doing that in New York City, but it was difficult. And as this was all happening for me, Audrey went on, CEO of Veridity, to become the chair of the New York State Public Service Commission. My main thing that got me excited was mayors were stepping forward as Trump was really turning his back on the Paris Climate Accord, and watching these mayors make a stand for the future of their residents. on this issue really inspired me to think, well, what could I do to enable the most constructive collaboration platform for these mayors who can make bold promises like carbon-free Boston by 2050 or carbon neutral DC, but are by no means the ones who are actually going to deliver that result. It's going to be leaders of a strategic but diverse group of companies willing to work together as a team to make that happen. And I got excited about providing resources for that to happen. So I started up a company in 2016 that focuses on best-in-class stakeholder engagement. I mean, stakeholder engagement's a term that is now used constantly. And I'm really got interested in, well, what's behind the term? What does it really mean? And when you pull back the layer on stakeholder engagement, you realize it's all about things that are so important to us: social equity, environmental justice, diversity and inclusion, prioritizing true issues, understanding how to triage problems and work together, leading with urgency. All these components are part of this idea of driving systemic change in an urgent, thoughtful manner. And that just continues to inspire me and get me excited. And so now the work I do, I partner with 4 city governments, actually 5 now, to lead quarterly stakeholder challenges where I invite my speakers to compete to articulate an obstacle standing in the way of that city achieving its decarbonization goals that requires collaboration to overcome. Participants vote on who has the most compelling critical obstacle to roll up their sleeves and work on finding a solution to. And then the group works to come up with a solution that the group feels is the best solution for that problem. And that format has evolved over a couple of years now. I started this in 2016, and now we do this in Boston, Washington, D.C., Chicago, and New York City. And in 2019, I did it in San Francisco.
Wow.
That's really cool. Yeah, I know I've been to your events. I think they're fantastic. I think you get the right people in the room to talk about a certain problem and tackle a certain problem, and it's incredibly valuable to be in that room. I can say myself, so really cool. Eric, did you want to add anything?
No, just maybe a couple questions and comments. First off, we actually have 2 followers in Belgium and like 1 in Utah. So why don't we explain really quick what REV is, because that's a very New York centric thing. And then from there, I have a couple of comments. But tell me a little bit about REV, because I know a little bit about it, but I'm sure you guys can walk through it a little bit more.
Yeah, let's jump in together. How about that, Lucas? Because it's been a while. But REV was extraordinary in that I wonder if it started with the governors. It likely started with the governor's office and Richard Kaufman, and then they looked out to find someone who could they find on the regulatory side that could inspire a seed shift, tremendous shift in thinking on the part of utilities to revisit their entire business model and how they operate. So instead of it being about this cycle of the utility being essentially a large bank where it's all about reinvesting in infrastructure and we all pay into this constant reinvestment in infrastructure, what if that reinvestment of infrastructure is taking us down a path that's not where we ultimately want to be as a society? And so REV was about reimagining an energy vision where it wasn't all about a one-way flow of generation, distribution, transmission from the utility to the end consumer, but it could be actually a handshake where the end consumer could play just as an important role in terms of their demand, their flexibility in consumption, their ability to generate power on site, shift power consumption, and have that work in partnership with the utility. And the idea being that if you were to do that, you could have tremendous system efficiencies that would reduce the overall societal burden of carrying and supporting the utility. And ultimately, the utility would be more of an optimal utility versus an incumbent utility. Those are the things I picked up. And what was interesting about, you needed someone who could go into that role who was not worried about shaking stuff up to do that. And that's really what my former boss, she was a great candidate for that role. She's a visionary, she's courageous, and she does not have a problem getting in there to pull things apart, to put them back together better.
So that
Yeah.
that's Audrey Zibelman, right? That's her name. She's now
Audrey
the head
Zibelman, yeah.
of the ISO in Australia, right?
Yeah, she runs
So
a power grid in Australia now.
she continues to plow the way into new territory. So
yeah.
yeah.
You know, it's interesting because your comments on what Rev is and why it was formed really kind of, is exactly what I was just thinking about as you were giving your introduction. What's amazing for me, being a bit of a layman on understanding the deep dive into the utility industry, is 20, 30 years ago, nobody would have associated entrepreneurism and startups with the utility industry. And now when people are having conversations, the utilities on the whole have an acceptance that things have to change. And then now you have the Con Eds and the Excels and some of these others that are really embracing the technology and really pushing it forward as, a catalyst. So you still have some utilities that are maybe not moving as fast as others, but I think there's a sea change in the idea of acceptance and the fact that entrepreneurism and utilities are now being talked about in the same breath. That never, for 50, 60, 70 years, was never the case. And you guys really crystallized that quite well.
Well, if I could add too, because I worked for a New York utility at the time. I don't think most people know that their utility, at least in the U.S. and in many parts of the world, is a regulated monopoly, right? In New York City, you have to buy energy from Con Ed. In Jersey, you have to buy from PSEG, right? In California, you have to buy from whatever your local utility is, PG&E, Edison Electric, whatever. But in exchange for that monopoly, they get regulation, and they're regulated by the state. And so in New York, they were seeing California doing amazing things. They were seeing Massachusetts doing great things. And New York was kind of lagging. And they were like, well, wait a minute. We're the regulators. We regulate them. Why can't we just push this transition along? And I think that's what Rev was like. Okay, we're the regulators. We're going to set the agenda, right? We're going to push the industry forward, at least in New York State, because that's what we have control over. So it really was a little shocking to people in the utility that the regulators would be so bold. A lot of us in the utility that wanted to see change were quite happy, actually, that this was kind of pushing the utility in the direction we wanted to see it go. So a lot of the young kind of new blood, really aggressive, pushing people in the utility, we're very happy to see it happen. So hopefully it's an example that other states can follow, right? That the regulators can have a say at the table. They can push policy. They can push the industry forward, right? It doesn't have to come from the bottom up. So it was really interesting policy and a good precedent to set.
Yeah, there's so many great things that spun out from that. Just taking things to a breaking point to be, revisited from different perspectives and built from a place of possibility versus, well, this is how things are done and we're just not going to move on these issues. Once, to your point, Eric, you embrace the change versus digging heels in on it, so many things become possible. Right. When that happens. And that, I think, is what has happened. And that's why New York is leading in such notable ways with, everything in the alignment that you see from the governor's office with NYSERDA and the utilities is really exciting. I mean, because we need to be operating through this transformation at a far greater pace than we are by default right now.
It's amazing how New York State has such a positive reputation, given that so much in state government in New York is kind of the model for bureaucracy and red tape, that they were able to create these institutions that really drove the bus forward. It really is fascinating. And, it should be a catalyst, not just within the utility business and energy, but for the rest of state government, which I think, not to get too political, but probably needs a little bit of shaking up and reform.
Yeah, so HG, if we could continue. So you have these engagement events, right? Roundtables, discussions in a few cities. So if you could name those, that'd be great. And talk to us about what the now issue is. What's the issue this quarter?
Great. Yeah. So in developing this framework, decided that there are 4 key topics that we need to be constantly revisiting to drive progress and impact on. First quarter, critical infrastructure and resilience, looking at that issue. Second quarter, buildings and grid modernization. New York City, 70% of the carbon footprint is tied up with buildings, so critical. Grid modernization, essential to figure out how we're going to modernize the very fabric which we're trying to create this new future on. Q3, we cover IoT, tech, and innovation. And this quarter is one where it can go a couple different directions. We can talk cybersecurity. We can talk about the importance of distributed long duration battery storage. We can get into issues around and sensors and understanding real-time data access. So that's what we cover in Q3, which is the quarter that we're in now. And then Q4 is mobility and transportation. So we run that topic cycle year over year with 4 cities or up to 5 going through that topic cycle. So there's a great opportunity to compare, like what was the most critical obstacle in Boston versus the most critical obstacle that quarter on critical infrastructure for New York City? Why are they different? What was the solution? How does that solution apply to the issues in Washington? And the way I'm developing this with my team is that ultimately these cities are competing against one another to deliver the most number of completed 12-month solutions. So that's the Super Bowl. For your city to be able to complete the most number of 12-month solutions vis-a-vis Boston or New York or San Francisco.
Okay.
So that's the vision of how this is all coming together. And you asked, so we're right in the middle of Q3. We had Boston and Washington, D.C. Upcoming is New York City on September 9th and 10th, and then Chicago on September 23rd and 24th. Topic, IoT, tech, and innovation. Just got the good news that Mark Chambers, Director of Sustainability for the City of New York, he's going to provide opening remarks. My speaker challengers include the Chief Digital Officer for IBM, Mahesh Sudhakar. He'll be one of the speakers. Pat Sappensley from Urban Future Lab will be a speaker challenger as well. Right. And Joe White, who's the new distributed generation ombudsman for Con Ed, will also be a speaker challenger.
Good deal.
So it's coming together. I'm excited about the program. With everything going virtual, we've broken it up into 2 90-minute sessions. Wednesday's a speaker challenge. The winner of the speaker challenge takes their obstacle to the breakout room challenge, which happens the next day. 8 breakout rooms of 8 leaders working together to come up with a 12-month solution that the room votes is the best solution for the obstacle.
I feel like this is the WrestleMania of clean tech.
Yes.
Your events.
That's what I'm talking about. Whatever it takes for this to do. I mean, the reality is we're going to keep watching. Yeah.
Yeah.
The scary reality I feel sometimes is the planet's going to go to toast, and we're going to still be more concerned about who won the World Cup or who's in the Super Bowl. And that irony just gets me sometimes. So how do we engage our desire to compete and win at something and apply that to winning at what matters most?
But you know what, HT? I'm going to disagree slightly with you in the fact that I'm the eternal optimist. And even if you look over the last couple of weeks at our podcast, a lot of the articles, of course, the majority come from Clean Technia, Utility Dive, et cetera. But we're seeing more and more articles relevant to clean energy coming from publications that wouldn't have touched it a few years ago. And I feel that the average person is looking at sustainability in a whole different light. And even the tragedy of the COVID pandemic even seems to have correlated with people having better awareness about their ecosystem, including sustainability and clean tech. So I get frustrated too that we do focus on things like, over focus on things like sports, because I certainly love my sports. But I do think society is prioritizing this. And I have a feeling come November that, there's going to be a sea change in America that kind of defaults us back to driving that technology incubation for sustainability in the right direction.
Yeah, and you couple that with professional sports not being able to play. I mean, people are going to have to get into a new thing.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm a big hockey fan, and I'm digressing slightly, but hockey has embraced it because their whole thing was all these kids grow up in the north playing pond hockey, and there's not too many frozen ponds anymore. So they're one of the first professional sports leagues that really addressed environmental awareness because they're seeing it impact the way that their kids are coming up with the system.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
there's definitely things that need to be addressed, but
So HG, where can I go to find out more?
I would recommend going to our website, goadvancedenergy.com. So goadvancedenergy.com. And if you're on LinkedIn, I highly recommend that you follow Advanced Energy Group. We post constantly the winning obstacles and solutions from our speakers. So it's a great way to really start to put your finger on the pulse of where these leaders are finding the true issues that need to be addressed collaboratively now in cities.
Cool. That sounds great. So we'll definitely do that. So thanks, HG. I think, Eric, we're going to go to articles, right? Let's get rid of this.
all
Okay,
right.
go.
Well, I thought this was a very good article, only for the fact that last week, of course, was our abbreviated episode 9, due to the fact that a lot of the Northeast was out of power for several days. I was very lucky. I only had a day and a half without full power. Lucas, I think you went like 5 days, correct?
Yeah, 5 days.
So leave it to CNBC to find a good article and good interview with the CEO of Generac. And my shameless plug, I have a Generac system. I have one of the old propane-fired generators that did kick in the moment that the electricity went out. So we had 50% power to most of our essentials in the house. But I really think, of course, we all have to take this with a little bit of a jaundiced opinion because he's selling a product. But the CEO of generator maker Generac comes out and says that there is going to be a massive change coming to the grid. And so I just like this article because it's a little bit of a continuation of what we discussed about last week, which is grid resiliency is going to be more of an issue. Now, just from a financial standpoint, Bank of America, for example, is recommending Generac as a buy. And one of the reasons is it is forecasted that it's going to be a very significant hurricane season. And as we're starting to already get into it because of certain weather anomalies are dictating that weather patterns are already demonstrating it's going to be a bad hurricane season, as we've already seen several come through. I just like this that he's saying effectively, the CEO of Generac, that if you look at what's going to happen, distributed is going to be a bigger part of electricity generation, much to what HG and Lucas just talked about. You're going to see a lot more decentralized on-site power generation. And even Generac itself is going from a fuel source generator to provide power to looking to be more of a battery storage company, much like LG and Tesla and Nissan and all these global companies that are looking to get more into the battery storage game for both resiliency and also from a green energy storage capacity. On a separate interview or phone call I had with a client last week, we were talking about the fact that in company that does energy storage systems at homes in California, most people are not doing it for the green nature of it. They're doing it from the resiliency standpoint because obviously California has its share of natural disasters. So I thought this was a good first article as a segue from last week's episode. But anyways, CNBC from August 8th, talking about the Generac CEO anticipating massive change coming to the grid. And obviously with two great utility-minded guests, I'd love to get their perspective.
Yeah, so if it's all right, I'll go first. I mean, I've been very frustrated for a long time that I can't get a non-fossil fuel, backup power option. And so it's very positive for me to see a large backup power company, mainly Generac, come into this market. They bought a battery company specifically so that they could offer a no carbon or zero carbon solution or a low carbon solution to backup power. So I'm hugely happy about this. I will be a customer of theirs. They are competing directly with Tesla on the Powerwall. I think, Tesla hasn't been in the backup power business. Generac has. So Generac knows how to build these things. So very excited to see this. I'm mad I didn't buy the stock. you know, 6 months ago or whatever, or 2 years ago even. So this is great. Yeah, I'm really happy to see Generic in here. So HG, you have any comments?
Well, the article makes me think, of the question of whether or not capitalism and consumptionism can decouple, because this is great that a predominantly fossil fuel based emergency generator manufacturer sees an opportunity. They probably also see a threat, because as you have more gas bans across the country in place, I mean, I'm renovating my kitchen right now, and I made the decision to go off the natural gas stove. I have an induction electric stove going in. I'm seeing how I'm electrifying everything in my space. And as I do, the need for continuous power is critical. I mean, it goes to some of the things you talked about, Eric, about today, about how we're struggling a little with our connections, et cetera. So a battery is a great resource for an electrified system to be able to handle momentary outages, re-ups, et cetera. So that's things I'm really excited about with the battery approach. I really would like to see ways that we could maximize batteries that have the greatest renewable, recyclable profile as possible. So if you've got the space, I'd love to see more lead acid batteries that are advanced lead acid systems. You can take that system, close to 100% of that lead acid battery is completely recyclable. So many of the components of that are based in the US, which it's just something important to think about. If you look at this on a broader scale, where are we getting the rare minerals for all these, especially lithium-based batteries? How could we make sure that we develop systems, power delivery systems for resilience that keep this in mind throughout the process?
Yep. No, I think it's great. I totally agree with your point that, it's what's driving Generac to actually switch off gas, right? It is somewhat consumer driven, and I think that's a good thing. I appreciate companies that are reactive to changes in consumer taste, as opposed to pushing out a product just because they already spent the CapEx on it. Almost like a little bit like HP. HP is, had such a great reputation for always reinventing products that cannibalize their older products, and that's how innovation continues. So good story. It was a good segue from last week. Thankfully, most of the Northeast has their power back on. And, these conversations only get more and more imperative as time goes on.
Yeah, and I'm excited about this concept because you really can't replenish a diesel generator with solar panels on your roof. However, if you've got a battery backup system and you've got solar panels, well, now you have an opportunity to replenish that battery with renewable energy, which is
and I think Lucas has an article coming up in a few minutes about Massachusetts that I think dovetails very well into that concept you just talked about. So should we go to the next one?
Yeah, we can go to the next one.
Okay. Now, again, this is, as I said a few minutes ago, I love finding alternative sources of good news regarding clean energy, as opposed to just the clean energy media publications. And this one comes from the happy people at the goodnewsnetwork.org. This is an article from August 10th by Andy Corbley, and it's entitled, "A Giant Fusion Reactor Hotter Than the Sun to Provide Unlimited Clean Energy Without Waste Marks a Milestone." And this is fantastic. I plead 100% ignorance that I did not know about this project. I try to stay up on these things. But on July 27th in France, President Macron had kind of a little bit of a groundbreaking ceremony to launch the assembly phase of one of humanity's most complex engineering projects, a giant nuclear fusion reactor that could relatively or potentially provide unlimited amounts of clean power. What's amazing about this, you hear a lot about in science fiction, they even talk about Iron Man, with fusion reactors, but fusion reactors are actually 4 times more energy efficient than fission reactors, which is the core of our nuclear industry right now. So this project, which is incredible, and it was funny, it said that the machinery itself has to be kept at a temperature of negative 452 degrees Fahrenheit, which you think is technologically impossible to do. But if you ask my wife, she thinks that's what I keep the thermostat on during the summertime. So I think we've already proven it in our household. But they actually superheated plasma up to 1,500,000 degrees Celsius, 10 times hotter than the core of the sun, which is, by the way, what I think my wife keeps the thermostat on in winter. But I find this actually just absolutely fascinating. And we've talked about over the last couple of weeks about leapfrogging technologies. And if you think about everything we're doing to prevent 2 degrees centigrade temperature increase in the globe on Earth by 2050, we're going to get there, but it's going to be a hodgepodge of different solutions, which is absolutely fine with me. But if something like the world's largest nuclear fusion reactor, which is, by the way, this particular project has 35 country partners, including Russia, Korea, France, Germany, just all the great scientific countries are involved in this project. If this actually comes about, there could be, for the back half of this century, from 2051 through 2100, a complete sea change on how energy is developed. And it could be so brilliantly efficient that, you know, the idea of resource allocation for energy almost is taken off the equation, because we're doing something so incredibly powerful in terms of generation with little after effect on the economy. And again, this is something that we're not going to be talking about in terms of the finance and banking world over the next couple of years, financing these types of projects, but we need to be thinking 20, 30, 40 years ahead. And this type of project really nails it. And so, I don't know, what do you guys think about this one?
Oh, geez. Yeah. I hate to do this to you, Eric, but I'm going to take the other side on this article. I'm actually really upset about this article. So it's kind of unfair because I was a researcher in fusion back in '99. I worked on a fusion project at the University of Wisconsin. And I thought we had demonstrated that these tokamak reactors, even back then, are not going to work. They're not going to produce a positive power output. So I don't understand why they're still funding these things. So it makes me really frustrated to learn that they spent 20 billion euro on a project that I think I could tell you right now it's not going to work. So that's a little upsetting. There's other things kind of hidden in here that are red flags for me. Like they talk about it's only a proof of concept. So it almost sounds, if you read this, like they're building a power plant, but it's not a power plant. It's a proof of concept, and it's still very early research on these tokamaks. So I'm very unhappy to see this. So if if you hated fusion and you never wanted to see it come, this is exactly what you'd want to do. Pour $20 million into an experiment that you know is not going to work. And then look, it won't even be fueled until 5 years from now. And then power will be generated 10 years. So 2035, so you take in this fusion technology, it won't theoretically be ready for 15 years. I don't know. I'd rather see some funding into internal confinement fusion. I know it has problems too, but it's already shown to be, net energy positive. So I'd rather see the money going there. But that's just me.
All right, I'm gonna bite my lips until HD responds. Then we're gonna throw down a little bit.
I would rather you guys just jump in on the throwdown and let's hear it.
First off, I think I don't know, HD, about you, but it's more than apparent that Lucas is just upset that the University of Wisconsin was not even mentioned in this article. So there's just a little Big Ten jealousy there, I think. But in all seriousness, yeah, Lucas, you bring up a great point, but there's two things come to mind. One is I spent a lot of time early in the last decade, in the early 2010s, on an economic development standpoint, look at small modular nuclear reactors as a way to replace coal. And all this great research was spent, and all this great research has just been put in the back burner or in the warehouse of all these great companies because natural gas prices dropped so much. And that all of a sudden, nobody was talking about taking out coal plants with small modular nukes. They're talking about just simply taking them out with merchant gas generation, which is fine for the next couple of years, right? But right. I think we need to have the visibility of looking deeper into the future, because even as our friend Joe Silver said at UFL, when he was a guest on our show a couple of weeks ago, I always say natural gas is a bridge to greater clean tech things, but when you're building $20 million plants right now for natural gas, people are going to keep them online 30 years. And you do have, CO2 emissions, albeit lower, and you have methane emissions coming from those plants. So the idea of spending a lot of money to come up with something that's going to be potentially workable 20 years from now is okay with me, because many of those countries that I mentioned are not diverting monies from short-term green projects or incentives in order to do this. This is a separate bucket looking into the future. We need to take
Hey,
risks. And
hey, I'm not.
I think this takes a risk.
I'm not arguing against that, and I'm pro SMR too. But I just think this is the money spent to the wrong fusion technology. That's all. I would have
Well,
spent it
I
on a
don't know
different.
enough. I'll be the first to admit I don't know enough
Yeah.
about right or wrong fusion technology, but I can't imagine 35 nations writing big checks like that, or writing, checks for projects that are doomed to fail.
Yeah.
May it
I
work? Probably
I
not.
don't know.
But I don't
I
think,
don't know.
I think a lot of smarter people over those last 20 years probably came up with some solutions.
Yeah, I don't get it either. And the United States is in here, so I wouldn't be surprised if Wisconsin does get some funding out of this. But yeah, I don't get it either. Okay, you want to move to the next one?
Well, I'm not sure now. I think we got to keep going. No, bring it on, because there's a segue with the next one too that actually, in my mind, could revolve around failure.
There you go.
So, HE, I don't know if you've listened for our last few episodes, but we've been really talking about green hydrogen over the last couple of weeks, because again, this seems to be, hydrogen was a technology that, at least in the United States, hasn't been talked about. Then within the last year, it's coming back raging. And I think it's because of really what's happening in Asia and Europe in terms of creating green hydrogen. So this is from Recharge, August 3rd, 2020. I don't know if I have an author. Yeah, Lee Collins. And the title of the article is Green Light for Pilot Phase of Groundbreaking 700 Megawatt Green Hydrogen Project. And again, what I like about this is the German government, in collaboration with 3 or 4 companies and one of their larger utilities, is doing a project on a 30 megawatt pilot phase of a 700 megawatt, they call it West Coasta 100 Green Hydrogen Project. Scroll down a little bit on this one. What I like about it is the inputs for the energy creation are generally going to come from offshore wind that's going to either be in place or going in place. This is going to be the largest of the green hydrogen projects, I think, in the world right now. There's one in Japan that's online that they talked about in terms of the electrolyzer itself. But this is a solution that is very complex in its inputs and its outputs, but they're effectively trying to create more green hydrogen, because right now, most of the hydrogen produced in country in Germany, they call it gray hydrogen, because it's coming from dirtier sources of power production. And the one paragraph right there, up to 10 million tons of green hydrogen could be stored inside salt caverns on the refinery's land and transported via existing bidirectional hydrogen pipeline to a Linde facility 30 kilometers away. So there's a couple takeaways from this. I hope people have a chance to read it. It gets a little bit complex, but a couple things. One is, the one thing that really stands out for me is how Germany does collaborations among big corporations very well. That's just something we don't see enough of in the United States. In the United States, usually if it's a lead company doing something and their supply chain supports it, but in Germany, and I would say in Japan and other places in the world, their larger stalwart companies have a mandate from the government, and they have a societal feeling that they really need to push forward in a collaborative effort to create next generation technologies. It's good because they all share in the risk, which we just talked about in the last article, but they also share in the reward. So, and they also create maybe more unique solutions because of the fact that companies are bringing their technologies in different areas of the power generation, of the supply of power, the outputs, everything else. And so I think this is a great story. I was thinking to myself that the French project better hope that this project in Germany works, because if it doesn't, then you never know if you're going to have some panzers rolling over the border project to hide that this one isn't working. Again, I really like this project. I like the fact that we're talking more about green hydrogen. It's something that I really want to get to learn more about myself and potentially be an investor in. And so, any input from our esteemed guest and Lucas, I'm happy to hear.
Yeah, I was really happy to see this. This is really cool to see a green hydrogen plant. It's going to be the largest in the world, bigger than the 20 megawatt unit that's currently holds that title in Japan, which is cool. I was just saddened to see that the article was updated. There's been a correction. their green electricity supply has not yet been decided. They haven't actually signed the agreement with the offshore wind. So I hope it's not greenwashing, but I'm pretty sure they'll just sign that deal and use clean power for this. But this is great. US, you need to get off your butt, start with the hydrogen economy. Yet again, Europe is ahead and we're behind. So yeah, it's a wake up call.
I think this is exciting in just the way that we're reassembling our pieces for our new clean energy power paradigm. I mean, we're investing in wind. You know, Governor for New Jersey, Governor Phil Murphy has pledged to 7.5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2035. I got to help facilitate an Ørsted Supplier Day for their upcoming event with Ocean Wind, and got to help them connect to local suppliers and the core EPCs that are bidding on that project. And so that gave me a sense of this is real and it's coming to the United States quickly, which is good. But that's a lot of intermittent power coming in that something like this approach could dovetail very well, especially when you think about the commercial ports all along the East Coast. This is kind of a nice dovetail potentially into infrastructure we have that we could leverage.
It's really funny you say that because I had the exact same thought. Last week we were talking about some problems with an offshore freshwater project on Lake Erie in Ohio. And I kept thinking the same exact thing, that would be a great solution to justify the build out of that type of offshore wind, because you're not just putting it into a power grid that may not be ready for it based on its intermittency, but now you also have another outlet, which is green hydrogen generation. So diversification in the end user is not a bad thing at all when it comes to a lot of these green energies.
Right, and a different form of storage as well. So it's like diversifying your storage and output as well.
Yep. No, thank you guys. I thought this was a pretty good one. So those are my 3 articles. A little bit more not pie in the sky, but some bigger picture projects versus some of my other technical articles. So these were good ones.
Yeah, cool. So I'm gonna take over. Ta-da! Lucas is in charge now. Yeah, this one from Green Tech Media. Massachusetts set to launch the new Clean Peak standard. This is a new chapter in the grid's evolution. So a lot of people throw this word around. They say new utility business models, right? And I was always confused by that. Like, what does that mean? So I think that this is one of those things. This is another way for businesses to make money solving kind of some of these challenges that we were just talking about on the grid. So they want to send a price signal. They want to have a market that creates a signal for clean, renewable resources to contribute to the grid. And so that's what this is all about. So they're going to create a new signal, a kind of new revenue flow for clean energy to contribute to the grid. So it's really interesting. This is by Julian Spector from GTM. I'm very happy to see these kind of things going. I've been asking for changes to kind of the electricity markets to make it better for renewables, and this is one way to do that. You know, I think the obvious one from years ago was have a ramp market, because renewables can swing up and down so fast. Like for instance, when the sun sets, that you need generators on the grid that can ramp up production very quickly. So I think that's becoming a market in CAISO already. And so it's great to see even more innovation in these kind of markets to communicate value down to the renewables.
Yeah, I'm excited about this. I think we need to have legislation aligned to address the peak. It's the most inefficient part of the whole process, which leads to the greatest negative impact on often underserved communities, communities of color, poor communities that are right next to these peaker plants. So you start to layer that on to look where you're seeing the asymmetric impact of airborne pandemics. And you realize that finding ways to handle this peak time of consumption with the least harmful approach possible is in everyone's best interest to figure out yesterday.
Yeah. I honestly thought, Lucas, that this article was probably the best article you have posted in the 10 episodes we've done thus far. And I mean that seriously. And it kind of goes a little bit of what HE just said. You know, there's a solution that needs to take place in terms of understanding incentives regarding peak power and when to use power and when to allow people to store power. And this type of legislation and regulation is long overdue. And I saw you just highlight the duck curve, which when I was Lucas's student 5 years ago at NYU, this is one of the things that truly stood out, because it's amazing how you've got such a quick drop off in clean generation during the course of a day. And then this other peaker generation, which is not clean, is kicking up. And to HG's point, as a result of that, you're putting pollutants in the air about the time of day that you really don't need to have those pollutants in the air. And so the idea of mitigating this with, you know, structural regulatory incentives and pricing should be something that's going to be adopted nationwide very quickly in order for us to really kind of get our ducks in a row, pun intended.
I mean, look what Commissioner Woodcock says right there. The most expensive 10% of hours drives 80% of the system costs for customers. And I bet that 80% of system costs is not factoring in health costs as a result that everyone bears in that society because of those peaker plants. Real important opportunity there. Just as an aside, I had a great interview with Patrick Woodcock that I don't know an easy way to provide this to you, but it was with Patrick Woodcock and the former Department of Energy Resources Commissioner, Judith Judson, who's now at Ameresco, along with Roger Cranenberg, who is in charge at Eversource of leading Eversource to be the first carbon neutral utility by 2030. So Lucas, I'll shoot you a link to that in case people want to listen to that interview.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we'll put it in the description, both in the podcast and on YouTube. So yeah,
Right on.
that'd be great. I did see another article just today, so maybe we can bring it next time, showing how batteries can better offset peakers. And they came to the same conclusion I've been coming to, which is we need longer duration storage. So maybe we'll talk about that next week. That's another rant I can have.
Yeah, no, I think that would be a great segue. Absolutely. I'd like to see that article.
Yeah, check out Form Energy. I got to be a guest moderator for the United States, was it Grand Storage Challenge. And I did that in partnership with Argonne National Lab and Sue Babinek. And we had on just an incredible lineup of speakers. And there's a gentleman out of MIT who is a founder of a company called Form Energy. And he's right on the issue about long duration battery storage to cover massive seasonal load shifts, load behavior changes.
Yeah, okay. We can bring that up. Maybe we'll do that at the end. I just wanted to come over to my last two articles, so they're tied together. I know I said I don't like to pour salt on wounds or anything, but considering that we talked about this at length the last time about ESG, and then like a day after our episode, this stuff hit, and after we recorded it anyhow. So I wanted to bring this up. There recently was the earnings reports for the second quarter for many companies, including energy companies, and the big five oil firms had to write down $50 billion worth of value off of their balance sheets from their oil and gas assets. So that's a big hit that their shareholders took. This article here is from oilprice.com. Actually, it's from our friend Svetlana Paraskova from August 10th. Big oil forced to change strategy after the oil price crash. So I thought this was exactly what we were talking about having a sustainable business, that if your business is not sustainable, then you're going to pay the cost at some time when no one wants to buy your product or service anymore. And so they're starting to pay the cost already. Shareholders are taking the brunt. And they had these huge write-downs, and they took a huge damage to their business. And so again, we want to reiterate what we said last time. If these oil and gas companies change their focus to being energy companies, change their focus to being focused on delivering energy to consumers the way consumers want their energy, meaning not fossil fuels, they wouldn't have these big write-offs. They'd be a successful energy company, making tons of money, providing tons of value instead of writing these off. And I wanted to dovetail that with BP. So BP also took a hit. They slashed a dividend in half, but they decided to do something about it. So they're actually going to start investing as an energy company would in different forms of energy. So they've pledged to become a net zero energy business by 2050. They're going to invest $5 billion. So I'll switch over to the Washington Post article. I found more details on this. So BP is switching over to low carbon energy. They want 40% output cut and tenfold increase in spending on low carbon energy. So they realize that climate change is taking a hit on their business. They're going to spend $5 billion a year in capital spending on clean energy. So this is the way to go. This is the example of how you can take your oil and gas company and become a future energy company and have a sustainable business that goes off into the future. So really happy to see this. Yeah, I definitely wanted to talk about this with you guys.
Actually, you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, my cynicism is starting to come through a little with that very sweet way that Lucas put that out there about the sustainable BP. British Petroleum. I think in the end, my issue is that an energy company is a consumption company, and there's a paradox there when you're saying that you're going to shift all your efforts toward being a clean energy company. If you're still just a consumption company based on consumption, fueling consumption, we're taking more than we're giving back to the only place we have to live. And pretty soon the road stops. You just can't go too far anymore if you do that. And I would like to see more of a sense of enlightenment with these companies around moving towards the prospect of more of Dieter Rams' philosophy of less is better. Like, how do you move these giants towards an approach towards less but better, right? We use less, but we use it, and but it's better. And how to make that be the way forward. Because there's huge opportunity in figuring that out that benefits everybody for far greater of a sustainable future than going and investing in a bunch of concrete, made turbines or electric vehicles filled with all these rare earth minerals. I mean, I think there's some way to find the way through that. And I hope that BP can think about the long game from that perspective.
Wow, that's great point, Ishin. That does correlate slightly what the comments I wanted to make was, first off, I thought the Washington Post article didn't go into enough of the history of BP that would have helped this article make its point. Now, what I mean by that is, if you recall during the early 2000s, BP used to have that tagline that they're actually going to be beyond petroleum, right? That's what BP will stand for. They put a lot of money into green energy projects, wind, solar, et cetera. And then came Macondo and came the accident in the Gulf. And they wrote down and spent so much money that in order for them to satiate their stakeholders and shareholders at the time, they sold off those projects because they had a massive liability and deficit bill. I'm going to give a little bit of full disclosure here. I became friends with the CEO who just recently retired of BP, a gentleman named Bob Dudley. Proud to say he went to my same graduate school, and I met him when I was doing some shale-related economic development. What I liked about Bob was he was an engineer by background, so he understood the fundamentals of the oil and gas industry from an engineering perspective. But he had to shore up the company, and he did not have, in my opinion, the luxury of going back into green energy because they were a leader before Shell, Exxon, et cetera. The new CEO just came in place a few months ago. People speak very highly about him. And he is the one who is rightfully repositioning BP to go to that next level. HG, I'd love your analysis just now, talking about resource allocation. And what I think is interesting is that both shareholders and overall stakeholders, employees, et cetera, are going to demand that their companies do find the most efficient way to operate their businesses. And I think the idea of using rare earth minerals in XYZ product has flown for now because people want to look at the sausage but not look at how the sausage was made. Going forward, the whole supply chain is being evaluated by ESG investors and professionals. And so just even from the market and society's reaction to how businesses operate, I think they're going to follow your mandate, which is being more efficient and generating return off using less. Less will truly become more. So we can be skeptical for sure and talk about, well, these guys are shifting their business focus because of, the price plunge that took place on oil from the COVID crisis. But I think they would have gotten there anyways, and COVID is a bit of an accelerant to that. So Lucas and I talked about last week that, we don't want to be cynical towards the oil field supply chain companies that are going into clean tech incubation, because we're going to need their buying power, their technology power, their R&D power. So, we should overall just embrace the fact that this transitioning is happening. And we could be slightly cynical or skeptical about why it's happening, but nonetheless, we're welcoming everybody into the tent.
Yeah, it's absolutely, this is certainly a step forward versus backward, no question. And it's an critical stakeholder in the whole future of humanity. So that they're making the step this direction is a good thing. I think it's going to be great as we go from it being also not just about being the most efficient way to run a business, but the most beneficial way to run a business for humanity is what we're having to now come to terms with.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
Yep, I agree. So, yeah, those were the articles for this week that we wanted to highlight.
Yeah, this was great. HG was supposed to be our guest last week, and then when the blackout happened, we just had too many logistical issues. So, like a fine wine, it was just better with a little bit of time a week later. But really appreciate your perspective, and tell us once again where people can go for a little bit more information about what you're doing, your website.
Well, thank you, Eric. It was great to be with both of you. I would say go to our website, goadvancedenergy.com. You'll get to see our calendar of events across the 4 cities that we're in. We're also doing action challenges in the Caribbean, doing some great work there. And then the other thing is, if you're on LinkedIn, I highly recommend you follow Advanced Energy Group so you can see the results and outcomes from our stakeholder challenges.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And Lucas, why don't you tell our viewers, our loyal viewers from around the world, where they can get more information on Pirates of Clean Tech?
Yeah, sure. So we're on YouTube. We're the Pirates of Clean Tech on YouTube. So if you search for that, you'll find us. If you want to find out when our latest videos are up, you click the subscribe button, and you also have to click the little alarm bell. That'll send you a notification when our videos get posted. We have some of the coolest, earliest news that you can get in clean tech and the best analysis around, and the most entertaining and good-looking hosts around. So you definitely want to do that. If you like this video, click like. That definitely helps us out. Also, we're also podcast. We're on many different podcast sites. Probably your favorite one, just look for Pirates of Clean Tech. You can typically click follow on there. And yeah, thanks for having us. And we look forward to doing these more. And we look forward to your comments also. If you want to provide comments, you can do that on YouTube down below. We'd love to hear from you. So thank you.
And only on Pirates of Clean Tech can you see an angry Wisconsinner blow up over fusion technology FUBAR situations from the past 20 years.
Only.
And I think you mentioned our Twitter page at Clean Pirates. We try to update there as well and try to follow some of the people that we follow in terms of media and articles that we like to read and publications we like to read. So it's been great. This was episode 10. We have one more episode to close out season 1, and then we'll be taking a little bit of a break. Season 2 will probably be back around Labor Day, and it's going to be new and improved with some great ideas. So please feel free to send us your commentary. Let us know what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, as Lucas said. And you may see some of those changes incorporated in our Season 2 coming shortly. So HC, thank you very much. You were a fantastic guest.
Thank you.
Eric,
Lucas,
do you
always
have a
good.
disclaimer?
I do have a disclaimer. This is the second week in a row that I would forget the disclaimer, but the views and opinions expressed by Lucas and myself are those of ourselves and not any organizations we're affiliated with. I'm starting to say that with like a DJ voice. We've been doing that so often now. That's a little bit worrisome.
That's okay.
But anyways, thank you to our viewers. Thank you, HG. We are the Pirates of Clean Tech. Yarr!
Arg.
Yarr!
Arr.
WrestleMania for Pirates.